let's get started. So tonight we're gonna cover how do you tell your story when you're interviewing with the company. I'm one of the founders of Career Karma, and I went through the job search in 2015 after I went through the boot camp, and I sent out a lot of emails. I applied to a lot of companies. I got rejected a ton, and at that moment it was very challenging dealing with rejection. However, now I get to share with you things that worked for me and things that didn't work for me. And in addition to that, I saw Arthur and Ruben go through the job search too with several companies multiple times. And so there are definitely things that you can do to stand out that will give you a competitive edge. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We also got Melvin here.
And so my story is also going to be a little bit different. I definitely struggled with having job boards work. And time again, I read tons of books on career development. I followed a lot of channels. And for the most part, the soft skills are going to be very, very important. And so understanding how it is that you communicate your story and communicate the things that you can bring value to a team is going to ultimately be that deciding factor. It's what got me the job at Career Karma.
Yeah. Melvin, and we'll save that for a different AMA. Maybe we'll reverse the table and I'll interview Melvin so he can share with you the story of where he came from and how he found out about Career Karma. But on tonight's AMA, we're going to break down how do you tell your story in the context of applying for the Pandora apprenticeship. Just by a show of hands, and you can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat, how many of you are applying for the Pandora apprenticeship right now? So I see Greg, Caleb, anybody else?
Rosa?
I'm sorry, what is that?
Great question, Nakisha. So we invited someone last week. Her name is Maria. I'm blanking out on her name, but she told our community about 4 positions that Pandora is hiring for. And the positions are to be an apprentice at Pandora for, I believe it's 7 months. And then after 7 months, you have a really high chance of getting a full-time offer at Pandora. And so she mentioned that last year, 8 of the Android developers who did the apprenticeship ended up getting full-time offers, 8 out of 8. And this year they're looking to fill 4 positions for iOS. And so on that AMA, and we have a recording that we can share with everyone who's joining us now. She basically discussed Brooke asked, what does she hear 2 Timurs? There's Arthur in the background who stole my voice. He's on a call right now. But what she talked about was apprenticeships. I think every single person on this call qualifies for apprenticeships, whether you're in the boot camp right now or you're going to be graduating in a few months. Apprenticeships are different than internships because internships are usually made for college students or high school students as a way for them to explore the kind of the professionals world. Apprenticeships, on the other hand, are a pathway for a company to get someone from a non-traditional background, put them through training and real-world projects at their own company as you're getting paid. And then the intention is for them to hire you at the end. So they'll basically mentor you, they'll pay you while you're doing that. And it's one of the best ways to get jobs at large companies and also get a lot of experience from mentors and other people in the organization. For tonight's call, we are going to discuss how do you tell your story when you're applying to jobs. And in this specific case, it's going to be the apprenticeship for Pandora. And I think it's great that we have this use case because we're going to break down, they asked 2 questions on the application. So we're going to break down those 2 questions. We're going to give you a framework and a template to follow. And then we'll take questions at the end. And as we're going through it, I want to make this as engaging as possible for everyone on the call. So please stop me, please participate. If you are near your laptop, please turn your camera on so we can see you, and let's get started. Okay, folks? So Melvin is going to share his screen, and he's going to share with you the 2 questions that they were asking on this application to Pandora. I know for some people you're hearing about this for the first time. Stay tuned for like, I guess, other announcements, because we do want to have more apprenticeships and more job postings inside of our community. And the best way for you to stay up to date is to check out discussions in the app. But what we're gonna do now is we're gonna jump in and try to break down 2 questions. So the first question that they asked on the Pandora application is to describe a time when you wrote code that either used best practices and design patterns or did not use best practices or design patterns, right? And they're asking to see what trade-offs did you make when writing your code. What did you learn from that experience? What would you change? And if you were going through it, this process again, what would you do? What would you do differently? Okay. Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah.
1 sec. All right. I think this should fix our background sound. Before we dive deeper into the questions, right? By show of hands, how many people already moved on to the next round and received an email from Pandora with these questions? So Caleb, Greg, who else?
Me.
Okay,
Rosa.
Okay.
Definitely such a name.
I have.
Let me ask you this: how many people? And we're going to be recording this. There's a number of people who are applying, so they can catch a recording. How many people think that this question was harder than they expected for the essay? Anybody think it was harder?
I kind of had something written down, but then when I heard Jarek talk about MUC, I wasn't sure. Like, oh, I need to talk about that.
It was really interesting. I wrote both of my essays today. Like, I was kind of in the flow state, and the writing part kind of came really easy to me today. So I spent my day like writing both of these prompts, and like my first one, the best practices, and I decided to write about the model view controller the design pattern I've learned in the project I worked on with this. So a lot of this I could probably go back. I could help others. Like, if we can proofread for each other and things like that, I would be happy to do things like that. For the second part of it, I talked about my interest and passion for technology, and why I wanted to become an iOS developer. That ended up being 513 words. My biggest concern was it said short essay, but it didn't give us a word count. So I looked into that myself, and I decided to what I found was 400 to 500 words, max. 500 words max was the best, range to stay in. So I wrote 409 words in total for my first prompt, and I wrote 513 words for my second prompt. So I'm hoping that's enough or not too much. I don't know, but they didn't say specifically a word count. So kind of
And Caleb, it's great that you already wrote them, because what you'll basically do after this call is you'll take a lot of the principles and frameworks we'll share, and you can just go through the questions and see if you have to change things or if you can make it shorter. Okay, so that's great. Did anyone think it was easier than they expected, these 2 questions to be?
For me, I actually just looked at it today within the last 2 hours, and I kind of broke the question down and just looked at and bullet pointed the different parts of the question. So it's going to take some thinking for me. And I'm the opposite of Caleb. Writing doesn't come easy for me. And I'm more vocal than writing. So, you know, I got a good idea earlier that I'm going to try. And I got to think about the different design patterns. You know, I'm more OOP than MVC. So, yeah.
Greg, if you mind me asking, what was that idea?
So the idea came from this awesome guy, and he said that since I'm vocal, why not make a video? Why not make a video of me describing or answering the questions, and then, you know, going back and writing down what I said in the video. So I'm definitely going to try that.
Yeah. That's awesome, Greg. What about Rosa? What about you and Daphne? There's a few people who said that they also heard back.
Yeah, I was saying that I had written something down, but then I wasn't sure after I heard Jarek's talk about MVC. I wasn't sure if I should include that because I hadn't included it. So I was like, oh, that's part of the design pattern. Maybe that's what they're looking for to talk about MVC. What I did was like Google search what is design patterns in Swift and stuff like that. And I found some articles about it. It could be anything, I think. So what I had, I thought was good, but I'm not sure now after I heard Jarek say it.
Yeah,
I would be happy to help.
That's a fair point. So for the context for everyone, there's 24 people on the call. So last night we had an AMA with Jarek Warren, who actually walked us through setting up Xcode. And at the end of the AMA, I asked him the same question, and he provided his response. He's now a developer at a crypto exchange, and he spent like an hour and a half, one of our longest workshops, where he broke down every piece and gave amazing advice at the end. I know Melvin shared the links, or he'll share the links inside of our discussions and the app. But to take a step back, so Rosa had a good point. Like, what is a good response, right? What is a good answer? If you take a step back, the first, in a nutshell, the first question that's basically asking you to answer is, what projects have you worked on? Right? If you had just in a one sentence describe what is the first question asking, right? What projects have you worked on? The second one is tell me about yourself, right? In a nutshell, you might see the same questions come up during your interview when you're interviewing for software engineering roles or UX roles or data analysis roles, but these are the most common questions that come up during the interview process. Basically, someone asking you, hey, tell me about yourself. And now you have 3 minutes to tell them who you are, why they should hire you, and build that advocate in them. So they want to refer you to the hiring manager. They want to be your advocate, right? So this is going to be very applicable to anyone, whether you're applying to Pandora or not. I think the Pandora team actually made it easier for people applying because they actually broke down the question. Instead of just asking, tell me about the projects that you worked on, they actually gave you specific prompts. So you have something to answer, not just tell them about a specific project. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense to people?
And also to address Daphne's concern. So she's talking about, so she asks, or her concern is that she doesn't have any projects to talk about. So from today to February 4th is when the essay part is due. You have some time to actually start playing around with Xcode, start looking at like how Swift programs kind of work, and build something for yourself. And to this end, like you're asked to provide a project that either did not use best practices or did use best practices. Now, if you're not very well acquainted with best practices yet, the probability that it probably isn't using best practices or design patterns is more than likely. So this is actually one of the examples that you can talk about. And as you start learning more about Swift and more about iOS development, you can go back and start talking about the learnings that you actually had by building said project. So don't worry about it if you don't have it now, but I would go ahead and start playing around with that so that you have something to talk about.
Yeah. And just to add to what Melvin said, not everyone on this call right now, if this is your first week on Career Karma, this might, and you haven't started coding at all, maybe this is, or maybe you started on the Grasshopper app. This is still going to be super helpful because this is an introduction on how to start thinking about what projects you might want to start working on if you don't have any projects, if you haven't worked on any projects yet, right? So this kind of foreshadows what's to come. So over the next few months, you can also tailor the things that you do to actually create this perfect portfolio, perfect projects. So you do have a lot of things to talk about during these interviews. When I saw these questions, I actually thought they were a little harder than what I initially expected. I thought they were only going to ask the question, like, I thought they were only going to ask the second question, which is basically like, why do you want to become an iOS developer? What made you decide on this path? But they actually asked two questions. And the first one is, it does want to probe at your knowledge of building apps, right? Note that that question is not language specific. That question is just asking you for design patterns or best practices. And it's left to be very broad on purpose because they want to see how much does this person know.
And at the same time, there's a whole different part to that same exact question. So we can actually break this down step by step. Now, I'll just highlight the very first part right here that is just technical, right? So right here, that's going to be talking about your experiences. Now, what did you learn from that experience, right? These are kind of softer things that you can talk about in a more general sense. What would you change, if anything, if you're going to go through the process again? Now, this is sort of something that you can talk about of like, hey, I actually got hit with this huge obstacle. It was very hard. I made a lot of mistakes. I failed, but I got back up. I tried at it again. I learned a lot of things, and I used those learnings in my next approach. And so those are certain things that you're going to want to highlight while you're thinking about how do you answer these things.
Yeah. What I was also saying about the first question, it being a little more challenging than I initially anticipated. It's actually always a benefit if they're asking you to do something more challenging, right? Does anyone want to take a guess why it's good that this question is a little more technical than just plainly asking someone to tell them about themselves? Anyone want to take a guess?
Yeah, I'll take the stab at it. Because I feel like, especially when you start off like that, then some people will just stop doing the application.
Yeah.
And definitely not go through like best practices and design patterns, because you have to know what that is and explain that. It's like, oh, I didn't come here for that. Yeah.
So that's Stephanie, that's right on the money. So first, what Maria said is last cohort, when people were applying for the Android positions, I think they got about 300 applications, right, at the top of the funnel. However, many people dropped out from the first round because they may not have filled out their questions or followed all the steps. And then a lot of people probably took a shot at answering a similar type of question, right? But they didn't have a community of people who were going to advise them. They didn't have people who've gone through it. They basically just took their best shot at it without having a strategy and a plan, right? So the thing that you all have going for you is you have a whole week for you to create the perfect essay questions, right? You have Arthur, Melvin, Ruben, and I to help you proofread your essays, right? If you have the best project that you worked on, but your essay is not written in a good format, it could potentially disqualify you, right? In addition to that, last night, Jarek, who's already an iOS developer, he answered part of the first question, right? So you already have clues of what would a real developer who knows iOS and React Native and JavaScript, how would he answer the question, right? So you already have a huge advantage. And so if you think about this application process as like a funnel, this question is actually perfect, because a lot of people are going to rush through these two questions, and they're not going to do a good job of like explaining and actually answering each piece. And so you have a chance to stand out if you put in the effort and you go through all the pieces. Does that make sense to people? So definitely don't cut corners. And what Melvin has done is he created pretty much like a template to break down the question into parts. And tonight on the call, we're gonna go through some of these questions together, so you get an idea on how to start thinking about your response, right? There are two questions here. One is about technical side of you, the other one is non-technical. So we're gonna go through the template for both. And we're gonna give you a way of thinking through your response. We don't want you copying Jarek's response or each other's responses. Each one of you has the experience to have an amazing response. You just have to force yourself to think about different pieces and then bring it all together, okay? I think the first place for you to start, right, is to work your way backwards, right? Don't just start thinking about the best practices or design pattern that you want to mention. Work your way backwards by asking yourself, what is going to make a good impression on the interviewer, on the person reading the application, right? What is going to make, what can I say in my response to make them remember me, to make them believe in me, make them help me, right? That's kind of how you want to start framing your approach. It all goes back to, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And you want to build that advocate in whoever is reading your application. I think before a few people came on the call, I was speaking about the importance of having these advocates. The bar for this apprenticeship is a lot lower than just a bar of getting through like a software engineering position at Pandora, right? They know that the people who are interviewing for this position, this is probably their first tech job. And Maria herself said that they are specifically looking for people who don't have a computer science degree, who don't, who are coming from a non-traditional background, which is most of you on this call. And so you are perfect for this role. You just need to make a good impression on them and show them that you have the skills, you have the projects to be qualified for the job. And so the first thing I would start thinking about is, what are some projects that I have built or I could potentially build over the next week that would sound impressive or would be interesting to the interviewer, okay? We're not jumping into the design patterns yet. We're gonna just first start off by thinking about the projects. Anybody has some projects that they wanna share that they've built?
I've got 4.
Okay, Kale, what is your most impressive one or the most challenging one?
My most challenging one was my Ruby on Rails project, and it then became my JavaScript project as well. I used, I built basically a very bare bones version of Instagram where you can upload photos. You know, a user can have their own account, their own photos. I have not implemented the follower-following relationship yet. I still have plans to do that. But like, you know, the fact that a user can have their own photos and it's secure, you know, no one else can have, you know, can see those until, you know, that relationship is made, or you know, with the user, you know, you can see them and they're showing you. That's really it. So I was never taught how to, you know, use like active storage, you know, in my boot camp. That was something I went out of my way to learn on my own.
Yeah.
So that was probably my biggest accomplishment, and like what, you know, I, you know, feel like I really got a lot out of that learning experience. But, you know, with it being a Ruby on Rails project, you know, I, you know, that's a, model view controller, design pattern framework. So, I spoke on that. I didn't get into specifics about my project. I just talked about, issues I ran into. I didn't like call out any specific project that I had, because my second project also was my first introduction to that. So that's where I kind of like spoke more about my, like the parts I got wrong and kind of like what I learned from those experiences. So from there, like, I just talked about, like I did a paragraph on the model, the model of MVC, that design pattern, explaining what it was. And then I did a paragraph explaining like my experience with it in my project and, what I learned working with it. And from there, I, talked about ways I corrected it, what I learned from it. And from there, I, closed it out.
Yeah, Caleb, thanks for sharing that. Let's break it down as a level deeper, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So as you're starting to tell someone about your project, right? You want to make sure that in the beginning, like what you did with saying that, hey, it's an Instagram, it's an app similar to Instagram, and you haven't mentioned the types of pictures that you would have on that app, but a good way to also like tell a story about your project is to say, let's say like, so I build an app similar to Instagram, but the app is really made for musicians. I'm a musician myself, and I thought it would be really cool.
It's really meant for photographers mainly. Like,
okay.
I call it Pictor, really. It's kind of like a mix between Instagram and Tumblr, really.
Yeah.
But pictures, it's a gallery, really. That's essentially what the application is.
Perfect. And that's perfect. So you want to introduce your project to them, so they want to ask you more about, like, they're like, oh cool, like I want to know more about it, right? So a good way to introduce it could say, hey, like one of my, like one, and the words is very important, one of my projects, right? It's not just like this is my best project. It's like, hey, so one of my projects that I built is called Picker. It's a photography app similar to Instagram to display a photographer's work. As a photographer myself, I wanted to solve my own problem and build something that that showcased my work. And since and again, this is kind of catering it towards the essay question, but saying like, since photographers are on the go a lot, I also decided to make it a responsive website, or I decided to make it a mobile app, so photographers always have access to their pictures on the go, right? And so in the first sentence or two, you're not necessarily jumping into like model view controller or kind of diving deep into like how you build it. You're just giving them like an overview of what your project does, right?
Okay.
As everyone is thinking about what projects they should do, you want to pick a project that that was somewhat challenging, right? How many of you have been working on a project and you were stuck on a problem for like a day or two, and then you couldn't figure it out, but then you figured it out? So I see Stephanie raising her hand. Greg is there doing the same. So the reason you got stuck is that you didn't know something, your code wasn't working, right? And so you had to figure out how to make your code work. And so as you're thinking about describing like what problems you solved for your project, think about those moments that kept you up at night or kept you up like working on that problem for days, right? Because usually those are the moments that you want to discuss. And when you're discussing them, you don't want to just say what you did. You want to describe your approach on what did you do to get yourself unstuck, right? Does that point make sense? And so
makes sense.
that's the second bullet point, right? And so I'm gonna use maybe Melvin, do you think we can make a copy so I can fill it out for Caleb's project, just to like show people how to structure it?
I think
if you just, yeah. And by the way, folks, so I think Melvin already shared, or he's gonna share this template with all of you. Afterwards, make a copy of this document the same way how Melvin did with his, and you're gonna be able to edit the doc and make it your own. And regardless if you're applying for Pandora or other jobs, again, going through this process is going to help you create an amazing story that showcases what you can do in a way that impresses your interviewer. Okay, and so in terms of the projects, if I had to describe Caleb's project, I would say like the picker app, or mobile gallery app for photographers. And in your mind, start thinking about like, how long did it take you to make it? And this is just notes for yourself, right? So you can say, it took me
a week and a half.
A week and a half. So let's say like
that's 10 days.
10 days. I built back end, front end, use and list out the technology you use. So you said Rails.
I used Ruby on Rails.
What was your database?
It was originally SQLite 3 or SQLite. That was what it was originally. Now it's on Postgres.
Okay. It's funny because when I was doing App Academy, it was pretty much the same stack. JavaScript. Did you use React too?
I hadn't learned React at that point.
Okay. All right, and that's good. And so the next step is like, let's talk about like, what were some of those challenging things, like some challenges that you ran into that kept you up at night?
Using active storage. That was one not taught in the curriculum, so I had to like go out of my way and like piece together different articles, to get a working version for myself, because it wasn't just a copy and paste solution. So I had to figure a lot out and debug on my own.
Yeah, and Caleb, let me ask you this: so with active storage, like what part of it was challenging, right?
The setup, because I also had to like for my first portion, the first part of the project, I used local storage. So like going and hooking up, where it was storing to. When I went to, get it ready to host, I had to figure out like Amazon Web Services S3 for cloud storage. So like I had to figure out how to set up a bucket there to, basically post, and hold, to store the images that were being sent, the files. So I had to figure that part out as well for actually hosting it online. And from there, making those post requests and then be able to return, bring it back. It was also really difficult for me because for it, like I was getting this really weird, fake path when I got to the JavaScript side of things. So with that, I had to wait till the request was posted and then saved to the database to then pull back the actual working URL to then show the image.
Perfect. Caleb, let me stop you right there. So that's actually a great story, and that's a great problem, right? There's a lot of, like as a developer, you're always like kind of forced to like figure out, all right, so I'm going to be uploading things to Amazon, but it might take some time for something to upload. But in the meantime, what do I do what do I display to the user? How do I know that actually uploaded right to Amazon? What if it failed? Then how do we notify the user, right? So those are all things that you want to just at first as you're discussing it, just write it all out, right? So I'm gonna the reason I stopped you is I want to make sure I capture all the bullet points. So upload images to AWS, and figure out how to, it sounds like, tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like how to upload an image and make sure that
it was retrieving the image like
yeah,
from the
that
database.
you're able to get like you're able to get a URL and the response, right?
Exactly. I had to like be able to serialize, you know, the image and get a URL back to it once it hit the database side of things. And then that's what, you know, allowed me to then, you know, show it.
Yeah, and display it to the user. And display, let's say, the image. Okay. Just by a show of hands, who kind of has an idea what Caleb means by this, or has like a rough idea of what he's going through with this problem?
I'm biased, but yeah.
Okay. So the reason, so personally, I think this is a perfect example, right, of a problem that he ran into. Now what Caleb has to do is describe it in a way of not just kind of dropping a term of like, well, the thing I got stuck on was active storage, right? Because that alone doesn't explain all of the challenges that he had to, like all of the challenges that he had to figure out, right? It just, active storage kind of buckets things in a specific term, but it doesn't represent what he had to, what problem he actually had to solve, right? So
I've written blog posts on every step of my, you know, of the way, of projects and everything. So I have that written as well, like, you know, what I had to go through to figure it out, you know, things that helped me. I could write forever on my projects and stuff like that, but I'm trying, like, the short essay part is what kind of like bogs me down. So like I didn't get into detail on the active storage side of things. I didn't even bring that part up. I didn't even like.
Did you read them or you wrote them?
Hmm?
Did you write the blog posts or you read them?
No, I wrote the blog post after, you know, the project was like part of Flatiron School's requirements to submit a project is you writing a blog post. So for each project that I've done, I've written a blog post for it.
Nice. Yeah, and it helps to start putting your ideas and work on paper.
Writing as well.
Did someone have a question? But I know we don't have, let me do the time check. All right, we have about 20 minutes left. So what I wanna say for this question, right, is think of it as telling a story to your interviewer, right? Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, you're gonna open and say you're building a mobile gallery app for photographers. Describe that, like, I'm myself passionate about photography and I wanted to build an app so I can have it on the go. I used technologies like Ruby, had a Postgres database, and be like, what was interesting is that during this, during the initial phases of building this project, I ran into a problem because I decided to use the Postgres database, and I was setting up the controller to make requests, but I realized that for my app, I'm gonna need to upload images, right? And so to make the images work, even though I've never used Active Record, I spent let's say a week. I spent a number of nights teaching myself how to use Active Record because I had to hook it up to AWS web services to upload my images. And the issue I ran into with that was that as I was uploading the image, I needed to store the link and the URL inside of my database. So I had to take the following steps for me to figure out how to do it in time, so I can also get the URL and display it to the user, right? And then you're kind of like giving the introduction of what the problem was. The next step is to think about like what are the what trade-offs did you have to make, right? Because now you can layer in like why did you use Postgres versus Firebase or like another database, right? You might have just done it, and I'll be honest with you, that's kind of why I did it, was because my bootcamp told me to do it, right? But that's not a good enough answer for the essay or during the interview. So you want to maybe do some research on like if you didn't have to use active storage or active record, what other alternatives are there, right? If you didn't have to use the Postgres database, what are other databases you could have used and why, right? And so the thing that your interviewer cares about is not what problem you solved, but how did you go about picking those technologies, and how did you go about implementing them, and what did you have to do along the way to show them how you think, okay?
Now that's actually a really, really good point there. To a certain extent, the project itself is going to matter to like just skill levels. They need to know that you're capable of doing what they need you to do, right? But on top of that, what they really want to know is how you think. And so being able to clearly communicate, this is why I made these decisions. I had these trade-offs. These were decisions that I had to think about, and I went with this one. Did it turn out well or did it not turn out well, and why? And then talking about that and being able to communicate, these are the reasons why, is going to be very important.
Yeah. And so right now we're still kind of going through the questions that Melvin has on there to like outline, like you want to basically get all your thoughts out by answering these questions, and then you want to craft a story that just flows, makes sense, and you're ensuring that you hit on all the important points in your story, so your interviewer is impressed, right? So, and keep in mind, at this point, we didn't talk about best practice or design patterns yet. So for the next question, right, now you can start thinking about maybe like what are best practices, what are design patterns? Did you end up using them? Like, were you thinking about those patterns as you were building it, or did you learn about them later, right?
The design pattern that I wrote about was the model view controller, which isn't inherently just solely related to using active storage or any kind of database piece that, you know, is a part of it. So I spoke about that. I didn't speak specifically about any particular project. Just, you know, I could go back and like add detail on like which one I used, because I also used the NBC design pattern with my Sinatra project as well. And that's what mainly I kind of based my writing off of, rather than my second project being like Rails. But Sinatra, that was where I kind of learned, you know, how it was, you know, how that worked, you know, with a lightweight version of, you know, an MVC style framework. Being Sinatra, it was a great, you know, starter for me, in my experience anyway, because like it's a lot lighter. And like when I first, you know, installed and downloaded and, you know, ran my first Rails new, that in itself was very intimidating, because it like created so many different files and everything like that, and folders, and, you know, it was hard to like to work through that, you know, like, you know, first being introduced to it like that. So I could speak about that as well, because like, you know, Rails being a, you know, a MVC framework as well, you know, but having like so much that it does for you. Like, there's a lot I probably could talk about, but like I'm trying to keep it to the short. Like,
I mean, I think you definitely you probably want to pick one or two design patterns, like maybe one design pattern, one best practice, and weave it into your story.
What about putting RESTful route, since the rest of the story is about the route?
So and again, this is all about how you tell your story and how you answer it. So I think MVC is one way of a design pattern, right? There's the RESTful architecture. So REST.
Only because the challenge was in the routing, right? So it's like, okay, so you can start to talk. Now you have even more space to still talk about the same thing.
And you can potentially say, like, as I was building my app, I knew that I'm gonna have to upload images, right? So I need to make, let's say, like, post requests to the database. I need to display the images to the user. So I have to do get requests, right? And you can like reason through the architecture and why you chose REST, right? There's a bunch of different design patterns and best practices you can do. We're kind of running low on time, so I'm not gonna go into it.
Did you consider CRUD as well as like, well, I don't know.
There's also there's a dry. Have people heard about dry code?
Yep.
Keeping your code dry.
Yes.
So
that's what I wrote about in my my first draft.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Before we run out of time, can we talk about the number 1 at the bottom? I feel like that one comes up a lot. And
how do you tell your story?
No, what are the 3 main things I want a person to read? Like, I feel like that one comes up a lot in a lot of applications.
Yep.
And I'm always like, I mean, I don't know. Like, what do you like? Like, you let me know what's interesting.
Okay.
You know, but how do you guys suggest approaching that one?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely, Stephanie. So let's wrap up this question around design patterns. We're gonna stay a little over time too, so we're definitely gonna get to the one you asked about. What I was gonna say about the best practices is there's a number of them. There's the MVC, REST, dry code. You can Google and you can find, if you just type in like best coding practices or design architecture patterns in programming, you will see those blog posts on Google. And so I encourage you to read them. What Melvin and I are gonna do is we're gonna share with you this template, and we're gonna ask each one of you to fill out this template and create your essay responses on a Google Doc URL, and then share that URL inside of discussions so we can provide you with feedback, okay? Since we're also trying to create discussions as a way for all of you to collaborate, it's a great way for Caleb to weigh in on what he thinks about your responses, and for Stephanie to weigh in on Caleb's responses and vice versa, so we can all help each other. Like I said before, most people who are applying for this apprenticeship, they're doing it on their own, and they're not in tech yet, right? They don't have a computer science degree, so they're just taking their best shot going at it on your own. You all have each other, you have us, and we want to make sure that you put in the effort and you share the links in discussions, and we'll take a screenshot of your screen and drop a link, and then Melvin and I will go through it and leave comments, and your peers are going to do the same. Once you fill this out, we can have follow-up meetings too to discuss to discuss your responses in more detail. We still have time until next week to do so. But the last thing I'll say about the first question is it's not about the project, right? It's not about building the app. It's about how you did it. So make sure that once you answered these 7 questions, now you take a step back and you say it in a way that makes it human, right? Caleb was talking about an app, but he also made it seem like we talked about making it more of a photography app because Caleb likes photography. He might be a musician, but you want to always make it about your passion, your interest, and you want to discuss the trade-offs. Why did you decide to do it one way versus another way? That's one of the best ways of showcasing how you think, because they want to see how you think. Let's jump to the second question, because to Stephanie's point, tell me about yourself. Tell me why you want this job. There's a bunch of ways to phrase this question. It comes up a lot, right? If you haven't, even if you applied for a non-technical job, they probably ask you, so tell me about yourself. Tell me, why do you want to become an iOS developer? I don't know if Greg is on here. Greg, are you there? He said, I don't want to be, or I never wanted to be an iOS developer.
Yeah, since he,
I think he put it in the chat.
he had to leave.
Yeah. So honestly, like, it's not about kind of what is the truth. It's about how you tell them the story about why you're interested in Pandora, right? So why do you want to pursue a career as an iOS developer? Just explain that, like, when you look around, like, your apps. Well, before we even start speaking about specific questions on how to phrase it, all of you have phones, right? There's a lot of things that you can use as part of your story why you want to become a mobile developer. You just have to spin the story in a way that resonates with the person reading your application. Before we jump into specific, like, phrasing of your response, to Stephanie's point, list out the three main things that you want the person reading this application to know about you, right? What do you all think are the things that your interviewer is going to be impressed by, or they're going to know, like, they're going to remember you by? What are those three things? Feel free
For
to.
me, I would think it would be my passion and drive. Like,
Okay.
Like, I feel like everything I talk about, if I can get into it, and I'm not a talkative person, to be honest with you, but if I can, invest into something, that I enjoy doing, then I have no problems beginning to talk about it. Like, that's just how I've been. Like, if you meet me in person, like, I'll talk about anything that I'm interested in. That could be basketball, anime, tech, those kind of things. And that's coding. Like, I've really, fell in love with, doing this. So, like, I feel like I could talk about, like, anything, and even things I don't know about. Like, I've read, things just because I was curious about them, and, like, I feel like, that is probably the main thing I want to, like, get across, and, anything I bring to an employer in any interview, like, just my passion and my drive to learn, because I do enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah, so that's spot on, Caleb. Stacy in the comments just said that you're eager to learn and you like solving problems. You're not afraid to ask questions, right? Those are all important factors. What you want to do, right, is going into an interview or answering this question. You want to clearly and strategically know exactly what are those three best things about you that present you in the best light possible, right?
And you're also going to want to have tangible evidence of things that you've done, of things you can point to illustrate that these things are a part of me, right? Like, if, for example, they want to know, or you want them to know, that you're a problem solver. Well, what are certain examples that have happened in your life that have shown that you do have that problem solving skill set that they're looking for, right? Like, what are those three things that you want the person to know? And then what are examples to be able to illustrate, like a story, right? Like, human beings, we communicate through narrative. How do you weave that into your story that you tell them?
Yeah, and Melvin brings up a really great point. If I just sit across from you and they tell you, like, tell me about yourself, and I'm like, well, I'm eager to learn, right? Or I'm super dedicated, right? That kind of comes off, it could come off a little arrogant, because you're like, I'm super arrogant, or I never give up, right? What they really want to do is they want to see an example, or they want to see a story of a moment in time when you faced a challenge and you didn't give up, right? And so as you're thinking about how do you tell about yourself, you don't want to lead with the conclusion. You want the person listening to you to have that conclusion about you, right? And they're going to make that conclusion based on the story that you tell them, okay? And so the reason you want to start with listing out the main 3 things is you want to first be very deliberate and clear on what are the 3 things you want them to make conclusions about you, right? So one example could be that you're like, let's say that you love coding or you love solving problems, right? That could be one example. Another example could be that you're like, you've taught yourself things before, like you're a self-starter, you're super resourceful, and you love teaching yourself. Another thing could be you're like tenacious, you're never gonna give up, and you're gonna get to the answer even if you have to turn every stone. So those could be just some of the things that you want your interviewer to know about you, but the way you're gonna tell them that is through a story, so they actually remember you, right? So they remember the story that Caleb told, because as human beings, if I just gave you 8 reasons why you should hire me, they might remember 1 or 2 reasons, but they're not gonna remember all 8. If you give them 2 stories about who you are, when they're deciding whether they should call Caleb or someone else, they're gonna always remember the person who told them a touching story, right? Who told them who gave them a really good reason and a really good story that they're gonna remember, so they can easily tell their peers, their coworkers, why Caleb should have this job versus someone else, right? And so since this is an iOS developer position, right? You definitely want to, I would say one of the things you want to emphasize is that, and based on how the question is phrased, why do you want to pursue a career as an iOS developer? What made you decide on this path? What challenges have you faced? I think one of the things that you want to convey is that you're passionate about building apps and you want to become a developer, right? And we'll discuss how to tell a story that emphasizes that, but that's one thing that you want to make sure that you convey, right? You have a passion for technology, apps.
So another thing that I'll add here is that when you're telling a story, when you're telling your story, when essentially, if these are the 3 things that I want the person to remember me for, being like a problem solver, being eager to learn, like these are all really great things, right? But at the same time, a lot of other people can go ahead and hit those like low-hanging fruits. So you want to find something that is very much like, okay, so actually I'll go back here. One quote that I've come across that has actually been super impactful in the way that I communicate with people is, people are not going to remember what you say. They may not even remember what you do, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. And so if you can find examples throughout your life that make you feel something, right? If it makes you really excited, or it made you really sad, or it was something that you were incredibly proud of, if you're able to capture that emotion, use it for your own like life context, but also the context in which the question is being asked of you. So in the context of like why you want to be an iOS developer. Well, I want to be an iOS developer because, let's say, for example, my mom has an illness, and building an iOS app for, this very particular type of, disease will actually be very beneficial for people just like her. And when you make it like so intrinsic to like your being, when you capture that emotion, then people will remember that. Like they'll feel some type of way, and the best stories, right? They'll make you feel some type of way.
Yeah. I want to take a quick break. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
Yeah, I think that was really helpful as far as how to approach it. Because also this is not like a narrative thing. Like this is a bullet point thing. It's like, what are 3 main things?
Yeah, well, start off by thinking about the 3 main things, right? Yeah. And then you can tell it in a narrative type of way, right? And what it also will force you to do is, instead of thinking like writing out a whole paragraph, you want to make sure that these 3 points come across And then you can even ask your peers and say, like, based on reading my story, what are the 3 things that you get out of it, right? And once they tell you those 3 things, you can go back to your prompt and you can see, did they get the same thing out of these 3 things that I wanted them to get out of it, you know?
Yeah. I can, like, for example, instead of saying, like, because you're saying everybody's going to hit those same things, like pretty much everybody's going to say, I'm a problem solver, I do that. But if you say, I did, you know, like the little puzzles people do or whatever, I did 75 of those puzzles in one day. You know, it's like, what the heck? You know, I feel like that, like, it says that you could do, so, you know, I mean, obviously, I mean, I would probably say something like that.
You want to make it unique to you.
But yeah.
They want to understand, like, what makes Stephanie different from Caleb.
Yeah.
Or Rosa or whoever, right? So if you can find a way to make it unique to your own, and you, like, have been born at a very specific time, right? You have your own life experiences. You live at a very, like, different geographic location. There are a million different factors that come to produce, like, a very unique Stephanie Davis. Like, how do we make that shine in a story?
Yeah.
Every one of my 3 are gonna be jokes.
Yeah.
They're gonna be good ones though.
Yeah, and that's good too.
And don't be afraid to be, like, somewhat vulnerable to the point where you kind of feel uncomfortable even thinking about putting it into an essay.
As a matter of fact,
does that make sense, folks? Like, you wanna come off, like, open, and you wanna, as you're thinking about these your story of what makes you you. A lot of people, they kind of refuse to be vulnerable, and and then the other person doesn't get to know the real you, right? And so if you can be vulnerable, but also in the context of, like, these are your dreams, these are, like, these are the things that happened to me, and these could be failures, these could be successes, but they define who I am, and be vulnerable about them, and then translate that and connect the dots to how are those experiences gonna make you the best person for Pandora and for this job, right? So as you're thinking about answering, like, as you're thinking about the prompt and what you wanna put in there, you're gonna start out by answering the questions that Melvin wrote out, but then you always wanna think about, how do I stay vulnerable? How do I tell stories that touch them? And how do I tie it all back to why Pandora, why iOS, and why are you the person for this job, you know?
So I'll add to that with Maria, actually, with her workshop, with her AMA, specifically said that they're actually looking for people to be vulnerable. And so that is actually a strength. And to certain applications, like some places, they won't really like that too much. Maybe it's a little bit oversharing. But for this very specific application, at least for the ones that are going through the Pandora process, they're looking for that, right? And so this is an amazing way to go ahead and just tell your story just straight from the heart.
Yeah, I wanna go back to the 3 main things, and as you're telling your story, you wanna also the story should be about you, but you always want to think about, like, how do I make the connections to tech, to why Pandora, right?
Like, or in the future when you come across,
like, what impact you want to have in the world, right? So it's not just about, like, hey, like, this is who I am. You want to make sure that it's you're connecting the dots. So for whoever is reading your story, it's very clear why all of the things that you have done before led you to be where you are now, which is applying for the job for Pandora and becoming one of their developers. Let me run through these questions so you actually can see how to structure these questions and how to create a story. So let's say one bullet point is you want to convey that you're passionate about technology, mobile apps, building projects. Another thing could be that you have taught yourself things before and you're a quick learner, right? And I think it was Stacy who said that. So you have taught yourself other skills and you're quick learner.
Let's see, it says persistence.
Yeah, you might want to emphasize that you're persistent and you don't give up, right? So you're persistent. And so these are the three things, if I was writing it, right? And there's a lot more items that you can include. But the way I would think about these three things is by the time this person finishes reading like these 2 or 3 paragraphs and they close their laptop and then they walk over to their coworker's desk, right? And their coworker is like, so how are those applications going, right? You want to craft your story in a way where whoever is reading it is going to say, wow, I just came across Stephanie's story and Stephanie is amazing. Stephanie is she taught herself many skills, including coding. She's persistent and she never gives up, and she's passionate about building apps. She would be perfect for Pandora, right? That's what you want them to do. Like that's the type of impression you want to leave on them, and you want to drive those 3 main things home to them. So if they did have to speak to someone else working at the company, they clearly know what those 3 things are, and you're basically giving them ammunition that they can use to advocate on your behalf. Does that point make sense, folks? Okay? That's why a lot of people get it wrong, because a lot of people tell their story in a chronological manner, and they might say, well, I grew up in Ukraine, I came to the United States, then I went to college, then I did a coding boot camp, then I started a company, right? And that story doesn't really tell them who I am. It just tells them like roughly what I did and the timeline. So you want to really you really want them to picture you going through all these different all of those life experiences that define who you are. Let's jump to what are some specific examples that illustrate the 3 things, right? Now that we know what the 3 things we want them to convey, what are those 3 things, right? How many people on this call have taught themselves a skill? Feel free to share what the skill is and how you taught yourself.
Out loud.
What was that, Stephanie?
I said out loud.
You can say it out loud or put it.
Photoshop, Illustrator.
Okay. Yeah. And these could be any skills. It doesn't have to be just tech related.
Well, I'm a music producer. That's mine.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. How many people knew that about Stephanie? I didn't know.
Did not know that.
How many people think it would be memorable if you knew, like, now that you know this about Stephanie,
yeah,
and I asked you about it, how many people are going to remember that? A lot of people.
Absolutely.
And Stephanie, did you teach yourself how to produce music, or how did you become a music producer?
Oh, would you like me to read the first bullet I just wrote? I just wrote it because I'm like trying to do it at the same time. But yeah, so the thing is that what happened when I got diagnosed with my disease. So this is what I wrote. So I became a music producer because I was no longer able to play my musical instruments due to being diagnosed with a rare neurological disease. Bullet 1.
Yeah. Awesome. This is a great story, and you can, as you tell them the story, right, it hits on what they ask you about, like, tell me about the challenges you faced in your journey and what have you overcome. So as you tell them about your story, you're already answering that question. Then you're going to say, like, what path are you on now, right? I know you're attending Flatiron, right?
Yep.
So you can describe a little bit about the path that you're on now. And as you're describing it, don't just say, I'm attending Flatiron. That doesn't really like matter to them. What they want to know is like, be like, hey, so after this happened to me in my life, I decided to keep going and not give up. And one of my passions, in addition to music, was technology and using technology and code to impact millions of lives, billions of lives through our mobile phones. And so what I decided to do was start teaching myself how to code by going on YouTube, going on Udemy, doing tutorials. Be like there were days when I would just stay up all weekend doing 75 coding problems. Like you're literally painting them so they can picture you like sitting behind a desk doing 75 like coding challenges, and be like, that was one of the best weekends that just flew by because I loved it so much. And that made me realize that I want to become an engineer. And so I took my skills to the next level and I enrolled into a boot camp. In the boot camp, I built these projects. And right now, I want to become a developer, not just because I can build apps, but because I can change people's lives. And that's why you decided to be on this path, right?
Yeah.
Again,
you want to hear a fun fact? Fun fact?
Yeah, we love
right?
fun facts.
So fun fact, when Swift first came out, I was like, oh, this is important. So I learned Swift, and then I started writing about it. And then I got hired by a company to write for them about technology.
Yeah.
But then a Google recruiter told me I need to stop writing about tech because that is not how you get a job as an engineer. So I quit. And I didn't put that in the bullet point, but the rest of it,
yeah,
still goes.
And based on what Stephanie said, what I would say is like, be like, if they ask you, why do you want to pursue a career as an iOS developer? Be like, since 2009, since the iPhone was created, I knew this was going to be a big thing. And so I started learning about it, Swift and iOS. I started writing blog posts, and that led me to start developing a passion for this, right? So you're kind of tying the story as you're kind of dropping examples in your story of things that you don't just say, I love iOS apps. You actually gave them an example of you teaching yourself and writing blog posts. And you can say, like, you can even find my blog post from 2014, right? When I was writing about Swift when it first came out, right?
The embarrassment.
But still, like, you get my point, right? You're kind of tracing it all the way back that, hey, this is not a passion that I've had just because I'm applying for your Pandora apprenticeship. I've always had this passion, right? What about other folks who've been quiet on the call? I know Caleb and Stephanie, they've been sharing a lot. What are some other things that people have taught themselves?
Yeah, feel free to steal all of mine.
Anybody else want to share some of their?
Okay, so this is not coding related.
Okay, yeah, that's
yeah.
totally
This is not coding related, but so I'm like visiting family in New York. I'm from the DC area. We call it the DMV area, and I'm visiting family in New York. So I don't have any of my vehicles here. I usually ride a Vespa. I don't have any of my vehicles here, but I do have my bike here. And my bike had two flat tires, and I had inner tubes available, but I had never changed a bike flat tire in my life. That's where YouTube comes in, because basically anything you want to know is on YouTube. So I watched a couple of videos, and I was a little worried about that rear wheel where the gears are and everything like that. But I just watched some more videos, and I'm happy to say that I rode the bike like 12 miles round trip yesterday. It all went well, it all went smooth, and now I've got another skill under my belt.
Yeah,
there you go.
Tia, and thanks for sharing that. And like, just from kind of giving me the story, right? What are some, I want to turn the table around on people on the call. What are some takeaways from the story, right? Now that you heard Tia, what did Tia have to do that demonstrate, and what does it say about her, right?
It says she knows how to take lemons and make lemonade.
Yeah, she's resourceful,
cool.
right? She doesn't give up. She thinks on her feet, right? When she ran into this problem, she didn't just like go out and like hire someone. She's like, I'm gonna figure it out. I've never done this before, but she wasn't afraid to do it, right? And so, Tia, what I would say is, I mean, this is one of the stories you can tell. What I would say is, try to, as you're telling the story to them, you can also tie it to coding, right? So you can say, so I want to become an iOS developer because I want to have an impact on people who are doing X and Y. I'm not afraid to run into challenges, and I actually enjoy staying up at night solving problems, whether it's related to code or it's related to my everyday problems. Like just last weekend, my tire broke, and I was in New York. I didn't have any cars with me, and so I went on YouTube. It took me 2 hours to find the right blog post, YouTube videos, and then I ended up in a matter of hours fixing the bike that got me through a 12-mile journey. And maybe say like, and a decade ago, if it wasn't for me starting to learn how to code, I would have just given up on this problem. But now that I'm pushing myself outside my comfort zone to learn how to code, it also kind of drove me to figure out this problem with my bike.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So you're always like you're going back and forth, and you're making it easy for the person reading it or the person listening to you to start seeing the connections, that you're a problem solver, that you're resourceful, that you would have given up before, but now you wouldn't have because you started learning how to code. I will say, Atia, that I think it's a good story if you're interviewing and I'm sitting across from you and you can be like, well, just yesterday, like this happened to me and this is how I solved it. I think there's probably even more deeper, right? There's deeper things about you that you can share with your with the person reading your application. Because again, you want to be like, this is a good story, but you're not being vulnerable with the story, right? Think about an example that's also vulnerable and demonstrates you learning something on your own and being resourceful, and then you're just like checking all the boxes, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. I know
that was the freshest thing in my mind because it just happened yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why
and I never would have thought of using it like on this application.
Yeah, it's all about how you tell your story. Melvin actually has to run. So maybe what I'll do is I'll set up Zoom on my computer real quick, and then we'll finish off the call in the next 10 minutes. Just give me a second. Melvin, maybe tell them about next steps with discussions as I'm setting it up.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of very valuable learnings just from this Zoom call alone, right? Now, one thing that you guys can do to kind of practice is for sure, like writing out blog posts is a form of having to deconstruct your thoughts and put them on paper. Once you start deconstructing them, because there's a million ideas, there's a million thoughts that kind of run through your head. But once you start having to, sit down, think about like, how do you structure this in a way that makes sense to other people? Because in your own mind, like everything perfectly just makes sense, right? But when you're trying to communicate it with someone else, you're going to have to tell them in a way that's like, it just gets the point across the way that you want it to. So for example, in like songs, right? If you listen to a new song, how important are those first 30 seconds? They're like pretty important, right? Like they want you to get hooked right on those 30 seconds. And so it's the same way with like either writing or within your interviews, right? When you're telling your story, what's that hook that kind of gets them, very intrigued on that story? And I think that with discussions that we've just opened up, it's a perfect place for you to just be vulnerable and start practicing, like first, like reading other people's stories. Like my story's on there, Timur's story is on there, and so is Artur's and Ruben's. And a lot of them are very much like detailed, right? And you can actually have a lot of findings from just reading other people's stories, seeing, oh, these are the things that I want people to know about me. And you start thinking about that of like, on myself, like, what do I want people to know about me? What do I want employers when I'm interviewing or when I'm writing essay applications? What do I want them to know about me? And how do I structure it in a way that I can kind of center the challenge? So for example, for this one, they actually want you to talk about like the challenges that you've faced. in your journey and like how you overcame them or what you've overcome. And so if you can make that like a central part of your story, that'll come across like very powerfully. And so we're going to be using discussions as well to be sort of a ground where you guys can put your essay questions or whether it is that you're trying to tell your story. We have a whole section called Add a Chapter just to practice telling your story, right? But for this job search, for this one specifically, you can post your links from the Google document that I sent out. Make sure that it's a copy so that you're not editing the original one. But make sure that you go ahead and fill these things out. It's kind of to get all of the ideas out onto the board. And then try to structure your responses and just post it on the discussions board. And the whole community, me and Timur included, will start reading through these and giving you guys feedback.
Yeah. Melvin, do you mind sending me this document?
Yeah.
And making me the host.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself here.
I could definitely use some feedback on my essays. I have the Google Docs link for them if you know, anyone wants to take a look at them.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know if I should put that in the chat. I know you were talking about the discussion board for, you know, I know there's a Pandora part of that as well. So do I post that there or do I post this in the Pandora squad?
Good, Caleb. That's a good question. So the way what I would say is use the Pandora squad as a way to find study partners, as a way to like answer small questions. When it comes to your essay questions, if you do it inside of discussions, people can actually have comments and replies. And so this way we can have a longer conversation just about your essay and about Stephanie's essay and everybody else's essays. And that way, if Nikisha looks at your essay a week from now, she's actually going to be able to see all of the feedback and apply it to her own story.
All right, folks, I'm going to have to bounce out, unfortunately, but it was a pleasure being able to host this with you guys. I hope that it was valuable. Please give us feedback. If you guys like to see more of these workshops, for sure, let us know. And with that, I'll hand you guys over to Timur. All right, good night.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, so we're gonna wrap up this meeting very shortly. I know it's getting late on the East Coast, but so far, is this helpful, people? Is this helpful for you?
Yes, it is. It has.
Okay, thanks, Satya. What about everyone else? Nikisha, I know you're listening. I know you're in the boot camp now, but is this helping you?
It is. It is. I would say it's definitely valuable information, and I could see how applicants for that process who don't have a community to learn from, I could see now why they probably are struggling. Mm-hmm. It's literally due to a lack of knowledge about, not so much literal knowledge like tech knowledge, but just knowledge as far as how to approach those questions that you mentioned tonight.
That's you're exactly right. Sorry, I think the lights just went out. One sec. And so what I would add to that is part of the job search is actually selling your story. And as you're thinking about what are the ingredients for you to get a job, it's true that you have to learn how to code or you have to learn how to be a designer, but that's only 50% of the battle, right? And the other 50% is how do you tell your story, and how do you make that other person who is interviewing you realize that you're competent, that you can do the job, right? And that you're someone who would be a good fit for their team, right? And so for all of you who are still on the call tonight, a lot of the things that Melvin, Ruben, Arthur, and what I'm saying, these are things that we've learned, we've seen each other do. We've also given this advice to thousands of other people through our podcast and our community. And these things have actually worked for them. And so now it's almost like a science. And if you just follow the steps and you get feedback from the rest of our community, you're going to be able to craft an amazing story that will save you hours and days of you just going to interviews and getting rejected because you might be sending off the wrong signal, you know? How many people know what I mean by sending off signals when you're communicating with other people? Okay, so everyone knows what I mean. But let me explain to make sure we're all on the same page, right? So
I know it's kind of.
Go ahead, Naomi.
Oh, I was just going to say, sometimes it's things like your body language or your tone of voice, or you could maybe give off some defensive vibes depending on how you word things.
Yep. So there's a lot of signals that we send as humans as we communicate, right? I see Rosa said some people might send off a signal that they're a little arrogant, right? Or they might send a signal that they're a little desperate, right? A lot of the time when you're going into the interviews, the reason people say this phrase, fake it till you make it, right, is you wanna send off signals to the person interviewing you that you're someone who's gonna get this job done. You're someone who doesn't give up easily. You wanna send signals that you've done way harder things before and they can trust you. And the way you send out these signals is by very subtly including different like words and different examples in your language to make them think that that's what you are. Because you could be the best coder, but if you're not good at telling your story, no one's gonna know all of the work that you've done. And let me give you some examples of what these signals are, right? If you're speaking to someone and you told them that you stayed up all night building your project, right? What kind of signal do you think that sends?
That you're dedicated, that you have perseverance.
Yeah, so you're dedicated, perseverance. What else? What else does it say? Go ahead.
That you take too long to complete a project because you were up all night.
So that could be another one.
Certain aspects of it, at least.
So again, it's all about how you phrase it and what you're trying to drive with it, right? In my mind, let's say I'm hiring someone to be an engineer at Career Karma, right? I want to see, like, does this person want this job because they just want to make money? Or is this person a tinkerer, right? They just love building apps. And on Friday, when it's 6 o'clock and your week is over, they're not thinking to themselves, oh, like, I'm so happy I just finished my work week. I'm gonna come back on Monday and open my laptop. They're the type of person who is like, I'm cool, like, my work week stopped, but I'm gonna go home now and I'm gonna spend and I have all these passion projects that I wanna build, and I wanna tinker on my own projects, right? Or I have this vision for this app I wanna build, and for the last 3 months I've been building it outside of work, and they've been solving different problems. They have a goal and they're working towards that goal, And so there are certain signals that you can send about yourself. And so as you're thinking about what story to tell, I think both Rosa and Annabelle said that you stayed up all night, or you have bad time management, but you want to kind of say it as that, hey, I was building it and I got my work done, right? But then I kept coding because I wanted to do additional features. I did like you might say, hey, I built my photography app, but then I realized that I also need to add features for me to follow other people. And so it kept me up all night because I had to figure out these set of problems and get it done, you know? So they want to definitely see people who go above and beyond. Some signals could also be if you're contributing to open source. And I've mentioned it on other calls before, but if you can weave that you've contributed to open source before, traditionally, it also makes a good impression on your interviewer because you're someone who does things for the community. Also, if you're an open source contributor, you probably know how to use GitHub. You know how to like follow a process to make a pull request and a bunch of other things. I know for some of you, you might be just starting out, so don't worry. You don't need to be an open source contributor today. But there are very easy ways to become an open source contributor, okay? There's usually a list of bugs that each open source project lists out, and you can just do the bare minimum. It could be even updating their documentation that doesn't require any code, but it still makes you an open source contributor, you know? And the easiest one that everyone can do is just figure out which repositories don't have like 2020 date updated and it's still using 2019, right? Since these repos are managed by a community, no single individual owns these projects, you could potentially identify libraries, packages like React that are open source, contribute to them and update the date on the project. And then in your interviews, you could even kind of drop that, hey, I'm building all these projects. Also, recently I became an open source contributor. And you can kind of weave this whole story and narrative that you are more experienced that you might feel like you are. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, folks. Let's wrap up this meeting. Let me share this document with you. And we'll just run through the summary and overview just to recap. So you're all gonna get this Pandora apprenticeship essay template. So make sure you go through it and you fill it out. When you get to the story part about who you are, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Take the time to list out the 3 steps, the 3 things that you want your interviewer to know about you. Also, think about in this template, question 4, what things did you teach yourself that were challenging, that made you want to give up, but you didn't give up, you persevered, and you ended up mastering it at the end, right? For Stephanie, it might be becoming a music producer. For Caleb, it could be basketball. Everyone has like those moments in life where you wanted to do something, you tried, you failed, but you kept going. So just think about all those examples. And the feedback I gave Atia is don't just tell them the challenges that you faced. Tie those challenges back to why those challenges now make you a better engineer, okay? So always tie it back, connect the dots, and at the very end, right? This question here doesn't actually ask, so why do you want to work for Pandora, right? And for most companies, they're not gonna head on say, why do you want to work for Netflix? Or why do you want to work for Google? They'll just tell me about yourself. And so it's on you as you're wrapping up this package, this present for them of everything you've done. You want to also tie it back to why you'll be the best person for the Pandora apprenticeship. And even though they haven't asked you that, it's on you to kind of connect the dots at the end, so it's clear without a doubt in their mind why not only are you going to be an iOS developer, but you're a perfect fit for a company like Pandora. Okay. We have a few minutes left. Any last questions? Hey, folks. So I'm gonna drop.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
So you said that you're gonna create a discussion for the essay, or is it gonna be in the squad, or what's going on?
Yeah. So what we'll do is I just shared the Google link in the chat. I'm also gonna post the Google link inside of the Pandora squad on the app. If you haven't yet joined the Pandora squad, even if you're not applying to Pandora right now, I think going through this exercise is gonna help you be just more prepared once you're in the job search. How you tell your story is super important, not just when you're interviewing, but also when you're reaching out and networking with alumni of your coding boot camps. You might be writing a cold email to someone and they respond to you, and then they're like, yeah, let's get coffee, or yeah, let's jump on a phone call. And so the same way how you want to build an advocate in the person reading your application, you also want that person you're speaking with to be your advocate, to be your champion. So by the time they're done speaking with you, they're like, wow, I just spoke to Stephanie. She's a music producer who knows JavaScript. She's also been teaching herself Swift. And for Pandora, since they are looking for iOS developers, and Pandora is a music company, they can't get a better person than you, right? And it's a no-brainer why it's just obvious, right? Why you should be the person for it. But you can make that argument for every single person on this call, right? So you just want to make that argument strong and to the point. So in their minds, they're like, okay, like she's the perfect person. How do I get her to this interviewer before she accepts this job somewhere else? You know? Cool. So yeah, to answer your question, in the squad, we're gonna share the link to what Melvin said earlier. We now have a feature inside of the app called discussions, and it's a forum where you can take a screenshot. You can take a screenshot of your document, of your essay question, and you can put it in there along with your URL, and Melvin, myself, and the rest of the community will provide you with feedback. Sometimes this feedback might hurt, right? But realize that we're gonna try to be as honest with you as possible, because if you're doing a few things, if you're sending off the wrong signals, this is the best place to fail, to try take a shot at writing the essay questions, share it with others. We're gonna provide you with feedback, and it's okay to fail here so you can succeed during the real interviews, you know? And by doing this, you're also helping us, establish almost like the culture for discussions. Since discussions is a brand new feature inside of the app, we do want all of you to be collaborative and to help each other nail these interviews. We want you to work on these iOS projects together. So whenever you run into a problem, you never have to feel like you're doing it on your own. All right, folks, any other questions about the next steps or anything discussed tonight? All right, folks, so want to say it's amazing to see that there's still a lot of you on this call. I hope this was helpful. Send me feedback, send Melvin feedback. And if there were some questions that you didn't get to ask on this call, you can reach out to me on the app, and we'll do our best to help you get into this apprenticeship. To what Nakisha said earlier, if you were just going through it on your own, you probably would have a shot at getting this job, but there's so many parts to it that no wonder so many people apply and only a few get through. By working together, like I was saying last week, there's 4 spots for this apprenticeship, and I want to make sure that all of those 4 spots go to all of you. And then once you all are in this job, you can help other people from the community also get jobs at Pandora, okay? That's it, everyone. Have a great night. Let's break in. I'll see you all.
Bye.
Bye, Nakisha. Bye, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good night.
Seeing you, Annabelle, Naomi. Great
Thank
question.
you.
Caleb.
Good night.
Good
Good
night,
night.
Rosa. Good night, everyone.